To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Robert Sullivan had always been a man who observed before he acted. At 38, he possessed the kind of quiet intensity that made people uncomfortable without them understanding why. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his methodical nature had served him well in his career as a forensic accountant, a profession that taught him to uncover lies buried beneath layers of deception. The Sullivan household appeared picture-perfect from the outside. Their colonial home in Millbrook sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn, complete with a white picket fence that Linda had insisted upon. Rob had built his wealth through careful investments and his specialized consulting work, often called in when corporations needed someone to trace financial irregularities that others couldn't find. Linda, his wife of 12 years, had grown increasingly distant over the past 2 years. Once warm and affectionate, she now treated their home like a hotel, coming and going as she pleased. Her book club meetings ran late into the evening. Her yoga classes seemed to multiply weekly, and her girls' trips became monthly occurrences. Rob had noticed, cataloged, and filed away every inconsistency, as was his nature. Their daughter Emma, 9 years old with Rob's analytical mind and her mother's blonde curls, had become increasingly withdrawn. She spent most of her time with Rob's father, Frank, who lived in the guest house Rob had built for him after his mother's death 3 years ago. Frank was a retired Marine colonel, 72 years old but still sharp as a blade, with weathered hands that told stories of battles fought and won. The first crack in the facade had appeared 6 months ago when Rob returned early from a business trip to Denver. He'd found Linda's car in the driveway, music playing from their bedroom, and 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter, one bearing lipstick that wasn't Linda's shade. When he'd called out, Linda had appeared moments later in her robe, claiming she'd been napping. Her explanation for the wine glasses, a friend had stopped by earlier, felt rehearsed. Rob had said nothing. Instead, he'd begun documenting. Emma's behavior had shifted around the same time. She'd started asking probing questions about their family, about marriage, about why some people lied. Her innocence was being corrupted by something she'd witnessed, something that had planted seeds of doubt in her young mind. Patricia, Linda's mother, had moved in temporarily 3 months ago after claiming her apartment needed renovations. The 70-year-old woman had made her distaste for Rob clear from the day Linda had brought him home 12 years ago. She viewed him as beneath her daughter, a working-class man who'd elevated himself through intelligence rather than pedigree. Her constant presence had added another layer of tension to the household. The morning of December 23rd found Rob in his home office, reviewing a case involving a hedge fund's suspicious transactions, when Emma knocked on his door. She held a plate of cookies and wore an expression too serious for a 9-year-old. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always, sweetheart. If someone you loved was hurting you, but you couldn't prove it, what would you do?" Rob set down his files and pulled Emma onto his lap. "That's a very grown-up question. Why do you ask?" Emma fidgeted with the cookie plate. "Just wondering. Grandpa Frank says you're the smartest person he knows. He says you can figure out anything if you put your mind to it. Your great-grandfather is very kind. But Emma, if someone is hurting you—" "Not me, Dad. Just hypothetically." Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing something far too knowing in her eyes. "Hypothetically, I'd make sure I understood the situation completely before taking any action. And then I'd make sure the person responsible faced consequences for their choices." Emma nodded solemnly. "That's what Grandpa Frank said you'd say." As evening approached, Linda announced they'd be taking their annual Christmas Eve photo the next morning. She'd invited her sister Rachel and her family, ensuring the house would be full of witnesses to their family's supposed happiness. Rob agreed with his usual quiet compliance, all while noting the timing, Christmas Eve, when emotions ran high and guards were down. That night, as Linda claimed exhaustion and retreated to their bedroom early, Rob sat with Frank on the back porch, sharing a bottle of whiskey and watching Emma build a snowman in the backyard. "She's a smart girl," Frank said, nodding toward Emma. "Sees more than she should. I've noticed. You know, son, I've watched you handle some complex situations over the years. Seen you take apart financial puzzles that stumped federal investigators. But sometimes the most important puzzles are the ones happening right under our noses. Rob turned to study his father's weathered face. Is there something specific you want to tell me, Dad? Frank was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma pack snow with the focused intensity she'd inherited from Rob. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the deepest betrayals. And sometimes, when we finally see the truth, we realize we've been blind to what our own children have been trying to tell us. Before Rob could respond, Frank stood and walked into the house, leaving Rob alone with his thoughts and a growing certainty that tomorrow's Christmas photo would reveal more than anyone expected. Chapter 2. The Christmas Revelation. The Sullivan house buzzed with forced festivity on Christmas Eve morning. Linda had spent an hour arranging decorations and adjusting lighting for the perfect family photo, her nervous energy palpable to anyone paying attention. Rachel, Linda's younger sister, had arrived with her husband Kevin and their twin boys, filling the house with noise and distraction. Rob observed from the kitchen, noting how Linda's sister kept shooting worried glances in her direction, how Kevin seemed uncomfortable and avoided eye contact, and how Patricia held court in the living room, making subtle comments about family loyalty and keeping up appearances. Rob, darling, could you help me move this chair? Linda's voice carried the honey-sweet tone she used when others were watching. We want everyone to look their best. As families do, they gathered in the living room around the towering Christmas tree Linda had insisted on. The photographer, a young woman Linda had hired specifically for the occasion, directed them into poses that would capture their supposed happiness for posterity. Emma stood between Rob and Linda, but Rob noticed how his daughter's hand found his and squeezed tight, as if anchoring herself to something solid. Frank stood behind them, his military bearing evident even in this casual setting, his eyes alert and watchful. Perfect. Just a few more, the photographer called out, adjusting her camera settings. It was then that Linda's mask began to slip. As they held their poses, waiting for the next shot, Linda glanced around the room, and her gaze lingered on the framed photos lining the mantel. Images of their life together, their wedding, Emma's birth, family vacations. Something in her expression shifted, and she muttered just loud enough for the family to hear. Why is he even in this? He brings nothing to the family. The photographer paused, uncertain whether to continue. Rachel's face went pale. Kevin studied his shoes intently. But it was Patricia who delivered the final blow, her voice carrying the authority of a matriarch passing judgment. A blemish, really. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's hand tightened in Rob's until her small fingers threatened to cut off his circulation. Frank's jaw clenched, a tell Rob recognized from his childhood when his father was restraining considerable anger. But Rob himself remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. He'd heard similar sentiments whispered behind closed doors for months, had sensed the growing disdain in Linda's voice, the way Patricia's visits had become more frequent and her comments more pointed. Now it was simply out in the open. The photographer, clearly uncomfortable, began packing her equipment. I think we have some lovely shots. I'll send the proofs tomorrow. As the tension stretched unbearably, Emma suddenly stepped forward, moving toward the Christmas tree where she'd hidden something behind the wrapped presents. She returned with a manila folder, worn at the edges and secured with a rubber band. I got something for you, Dad, Emma said, her young voice steady despite the adult drama surrounding her. Grandpa told me to give you this. All eyes turned to Frank, who nodded once. A subtle confirmation that passed between grandfather and granddaughter. Rob accepted the folder, noting its weight and the careful way Emma handled it, as if she understood its importance without knowing its contents. What is it, sweetheart? Rob asked, though something in Frank's expression suggested he already knew this wasn't a typical Christmas gift. Grandpa said it was important stuff about our family. He said you'd know what to do with it when you were ready. Linda's face had gone ashen. Emma, why don't you go play with your cousins? The adults need to. No. The word came from Rob with quiet authority. Emma stays. He removed the rubber band and opened the folder. The first item was a photograph, Linda and a man Rob recognized as Derek Wilson, the contractor who'd renovated their master bathroom 6 months ago. They were kissing in what appeared to be a hotel parking lot, the image sharp and clearly taken with a telephoto lens. But it was the second item that made Rob's blood run cold. A medical report dated 8 weeks ago, showing Linda had been treated for a sexually transmitted infection, one Rob had never contracted, despite their intimate relationship. The third item was a bank statement from an account Rob didn't recognize, showing regular deposits that coincided with his business trips. The signature on the account was Linda's. Frank stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Emma came to me 6 weeks ago, confused about some things she'd seen and heard. She's a smart girl, Rob. She knew something was wrong, but didn't know how to tell you. So I helped her understand that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people who love them most. You had me followed. Linda's voice was barely a whisper. I had my family protected, Frank corrected. Emma deserved to know the truth about what was happening in her home. And my son deserved evidence of what his wife was really doing while he was working to provide for his family. The room erupted in competing voices, Patricia demanding explanations, Rachel trying to mediate, Kevin herding his children toward the door. But Rob heard none of it. His attention was focused entirely on the folder's remaining contents. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Linda and Derek, credit card statements for hotel rooms charged on days when Linda claimed to be at book club, and finally, a USB drive labeled simply audio. Emma moved to stand beside her great-grandfather, her small hand finding his weathered one. I'm sorry, Dad. I wanted to tell you, but Grandpa said we needed proof first. He said you're too good to lie to, and that people who lie to good people deserve consequences. Rob closed the folder and looked directly at his wife, noting how she'd moved unconsciously toward the door, how her hands shook as she reached for her purse. Where are you going, Linda? I need some air. This is ridiculous. Frank's clearly manipulated Emma into. Sit down. The command was spoken quietly, but something in Rob's tone made everyone in the room freeze. Rachel and Kevin exchanged glances and quietly gathered their children, making excuses about early Christmas plans as they fled the increasingly volatile situation. Patricia, however, remained planted in her chair, her chin raised defiantly. How dare you speak to my daughter that way? After everything she's done for you, sacrificed for this family. Patricia, Rob interrupted, still looking at Linda. I suggest you remain quiet. Unless you'd like me to examine your role in helping Linda hide a secret bank account funded by money that should have been going toward Emma's college fund. The older woman's face went white, confirming Rob's suspicion that the betrayal ran deeper than just adultery. Emma tugged on Frank's jacket. Grandpa, can we go now? I don't want to hear the yelling. Frank nodded and led Emma toward the door, but paused to address his son. The rest of the evidence is in the safe in my room. Combination is Emma's birthday. She helped me organize it. Thought she should understand exactly what her mother had chosen over her family. As Frank and Emma left, Rob remained standing in the center of the living room, holding the folder that had just destroyed the facade of his marriage. Linda sat frozen on the couch, tears streaming down her face, while Patricia glared at him with undisguised hatred. So, Rob said finally, his voice eerily calm, let's discuss what happens next. Chapter 3. The Unraveling Truth. The silence in the living room stretched for nearly a minute before Linda finally found her voice. Rob, I can explain. No. Rob moved to his favorite chair, settling into it with the controlled movements of a predator claiming territory. You can confess. There's a difference. Patricia bristled. You sanctimonious bastard. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Working all hours, leaving Linda alone to raise Emma while you chase money. Patricia, be very careful about your next words, Rob said without looking at her, his attention fixed on Linda. Because unlike my wife, I've never made any promises to you. And unlike my wife, you're not the mother of my child. Linda's sobbing had stopped, replaced by a wary stillness. She'd seen this side of Rob only once before, when a business partner had tried to cheat him out of a substantial fee. That man had ended up losing his license and his reputation, and Rob had orchestrated it all with the methodical precision of a surgeon. How long has it been going on? Rob asked. Linda's voice was barely audible. 8 months. When did it become physical? Rob, please. Answer the question. 6 months ago, when Derek started the bathroom renovation. Rob nodded as if this confirmed something he already suspected. And the money? The secret account. Patricia started to speak, but Linda cut her off with a sharp look. I was scared. I thought if you found out, you'd leave us with nothing. I needed security. You were stealing from our family to fund an affair, and you want me to believe it was about security? Rob's laugh held no humor. How much? 47,000, Linda whispered. And Derek? Is he aware of the financial arrangement? Linda's hesitation told Rob everything he needed to know. He thinks you're abusive. I told him you controlled all the money, that I had to hide funds to escape. Interesting. Rob opened the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper he hadn't examined earlier. Because according to this background check Frank had run on Derek Wilson, he's had this conversation with 3 other married women in the past 5 years. Same pattern: emotional manipulation, claims of abuse, secret financial arrangements. The blood drained from Linda's face. That's not. He wouldn't. Patricia, you've been remarkably quiet for the past few minutes. I assume that means you're finally understanding the gravity of the situation. The older woman's defiance had crumbled. I just wanted Linda to be happy. You're so cold, so calculating. She deserves passion, romance. She deserves whatever consequences come from her choices, Rob interrupted. As do you. As an accessory to theft and fraud. You can't prove I knew about the money, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Rob stood and walked to the window, observing the peaceful neighborhood beyond. Children played in yards. Families prepared for Christmas celebrations. Lives continued their normal rhythms while his own world had just been systematically dismantled. Frank spent 6 weeks documenting Linda's activities. The USB drive contains audio recordings from their hotel meetings, including detailed discussions about liquidating assets and establishing offshore accounts. It also contains Derek's conversations with his previous targets, whom Frank located and interviewed. Linda's face had gone gray. What do you want? Rob turned back to face them both. I want the truth. All of it. Starting with exactly how deep this conspiracy goes. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. There's no conspiracy. Patricia, Derek Wilson isn't just a contractor. He's a professional manipulator who specifically targets wealthy, married women. He identified Linda as a mark, researched our family's financial situation, and crafted his approach accordingly. The bathroom renovation was a pretext to gain access to our home and evaluate our assets. Rob pulled out his phone and played a short audio clip. Derek's voice filled the room. The husband's a forensic accountant, so we need to be extra careful with the paper trail. But Linda says he's completely oblivious to personal stuff. Spends all his time buried in work. The old lady's been helpful. She's got access to his home office when he's traveling. Patricia's face crumpled. He said he loved her. He said he wanted to marry her after the divorce. And you believed him, despite the fact that Linda was still married with a young daughter? Despite the fact that he encouraged her to steal from her own family? Rob's voice carried no emotion, but something dangerous glittered in his eyes. You helped him gain access to my home office. You provided information about my travel schedule. You participated in planning a theft that would have destroyed Emma's future. Linda found her voice. We never meant for Emma to be hurt. We planned to. You planned to disappear with our daughter's college fund and leave me to explain to a 9-year-old why her mother abandoned her. Rob's composure never cracked, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You planned to traumatize my daughter to fund your new life with a con artist. What do you want? Linda repeated, her voice breaking. Rob returned to his chair, studying both women with the analytical gaze that had made him successful in his profession. I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone you've involved in this betrayal. Including Emma? Patricia asked, her grandmother's instincts finally asserting themselves. Emma will be protected. She's innocent in this, though you've certainly tried to corrupt that innocence by involving her in your schemes. Rob opened his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a long list of contacts. Derek Wilson is currently meeting with another potential target, a woman named Susan Hayes whose husband owns a successful real estate company. Should I call and warn her? Or should I let Derek's pattern continue? Linda's eyes widened. You can't. I can do anything I choose, Linda, just as you could have chosen fidelity over adultery, honesty over theft, your daughter's welfare over your own desires. Rob's voice remained eerily calm. The question now is what happens next. And that depends entirely on how completely you're willing to cooperate with making this right. Patricia leaned forward. What kind of cooperation? Rob smiled for the first time since opening the folder, but it was the cold expression of a predator who'd cornered his prey. The kind that ensures everyone responsible for this betrayal faces appropriate consequences. Starting with Derek Wilson, and ending with each of you understanding exactly what you've lost through your choices. And Emma? Linda whispered. Emma will learn that actions have consequences, that betrayal comes with a price, and that some mistakes can never be forgiven. Rob's gray eyes fixed on his wife with laser intensity. She'll also learn that her father is capable of protecting what matters to him, regardless of who threatens it. The implications of his words hung in the air like a storm about to break, and both women finally began to understand that they hadn't just betrayed a husband and father. They'd challenged a man whose profession was uncovering truth and whose nature was ensuring justice, regardless of the cost. Chapter 4. The Professional. While Linda and Patricia sat in stunned silence, Rob excused himself to retrieve the remaining evidence from Frank's safe. As he walked through the house he'd built for his family, memories flickered through his mind, not with sentimentality, but with the cold analysis of someone cataloging assets and liabilities. The guest house Frank occupied had been Rob's first major construction project after purchasing the property. He'd designed it with his father's military precision in mind: secure, functional, and completely private. What Linda had never known was that Frank's quarters also served as Rob's backup office, complete with surveillance equipment and secure storage that not even his wife knew existed. Frank was sitting at his kitchen table with Emma, helping her build a gingerbread house while she chattered about Christmas plans. The normalcy of the scene contrasted sharply with the chaos Rob had left in the main house. "How did it go?" Frank asked without looking up from the frosting he was applying to gingerbread walls. "About as expected." Rob activated the fingerprint scanner on Frank's safe and retrieved 3 additional folders. "Emma, sweetheart, would you like to stay with Grandpa Frank tonight? We're going to have some grown-up conversations in the main house." Emma's mature eyes met his. "Is Mom going to leave?" The directness of the question struck Rob like a physical blow. His 9-year-old daughter had not only witnessed enough to understand the situation, but had already begun preparing herself for the inevitable outcome. "Yes, sweetheart. She's made choices that mean she can't stay here anymore." "Will I still see her?" Rob knelt beside Emma's chair, choosing his words carefully. "That will depend on many things. But you'll always be my daughter, and you'll always have a home here with me and Grandpa Frank." Emma nodded solemnly, then returned to her gingerbread construction. "Will Derek go away too?" Frank's hand stilled on the frosting tube. Even he hadn't expected Emma to know Derek's name or understand his role in the situation. "How do you know about Derek?" Rob asked gently. "I heard Mom talking to him on the phone. She said mean things about you. I didn't like it." Emma carefully placed a candy cane against the gingerbread door. "Grandpa Frank taught me that when people say mean things about your family, you should remember what they said, because it tells you who they really are." Rob looked at his father with new understanding. Frank hadn't just been documenting Linda's betrayal. He'd been teaching Emma to protect herself by recognizing deception and manipulation. That's very wise advice from Grandpa Frank. "Is Derek a bad man?" Rob considered the question seriously. "Derek is a man who hurts families for money." "Yes, he's a bad man. Will you make sure he can't hurt other families?" The innocent question carried weight far beyond Emma's years, and Rob realized his daughter was asking whether he would seek justice or merely accept victimhood. "Yes, Emma. I will make sure Derek can't hurt other families." Satisfied with this answer, Emma returned to her gingerbread house, while Rob retreated to Frank's office to examine the additional evidence. What he found exceeded even his analytical expectations. Frank had compiled a comprehensive dossier on Derek Wilson that revealed a pattern spanning 8 years and 11 victims across 3 states. Derek's method was sophisticated. He researched potential targets through social media and public records, identified emotional vulnerabilities, then positioned himself as their salvation from whatever problems he'd identified in their marriages. The financial component was always the same. Derek convinced women to establish secret accounts, claiming they needed protection from controlling husbands. He'd then manipulate them into gradually transferring larger amounts, promising to help them start new lives together. In every case, Derek disappeared once the accounts reached significant balances, leaving his victims to face the legal and personal consequences of their choices. But Derek had made a crucial error with the Sullivan family. He'd underestimated both Frank's protective instincts and Rob's professional capabilities. The final folder contained what Frank labeled operational intelligence: Derek's current address, financial records, vehicle information, and most importantly, his real identity. Derek Wilson was actually Derek Hoffman, a man with a criminal record including fraud convictions in Arizona and Nevada. More interesting was Derek's current situation. He was simultaneously pursuing 3 other potential victims, had accumulated substantial debts to some unsavory individuals in Atlantic City, and was planning to disappear within the next month with whatever funds he could extract from his current targets. Rob's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Everything okay?" Linda seemed upset when she called. Derek. The audacity of the man contacting him directly triggered something cold and calculating in Rob's mind. Derek had just made the fatal mistake of bringing the fight to Rob's door. Rob forwarded the message to Frank's secure phone, then typed a response. "Family photo didn't go as planned. Linda's very emotional. Could you come by tomorrow to discuss the final bathroom details? She could use a friend right now." Derek's response came within minutes. "Of course. What time works?" 10 a.m. "Use the side entrance. We're trying to keep family drama away from Emma." "See you then." Rob smiled as he set down his phone. Derek's eagerness to console his distraught victim had just sealed his fate. Frank appeared in the doorway. "I assume you have a plan?" "I have several plans. Derek's visit tomorrow will determine which one we implement." "And Linda?" Rob's expression hardened. "Linda will learn that stealing from her daughter's future and betraying her family comes with permanent consequences. There will be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, and no second chances. She's still Emma's mother. She's a woman who chose an affair and theft over her daughter's welfare. Emma deserves better than a mother who would sacrifice her child's future for personal gratification." Frank studied his son's face, recognizing the cold determination that had helped Rob excel in uncovering financial crimes. "And Patricia?" "Patricia chose to enable the theft and betrayal of her own granddaughter's family. She'll face appropriate consequences for that choice. You know there's no coming back from this path, son. Once you decide someone is beyond forgiveness." Rob met his father's eyes. "I learned from watching you, Dad. You taught me that loyalty and betrayal both have consequences, and that protecting family means being willing to eliminate threats, regardless of their relationship to you." Frank nodded slowly. "Then you understand that Emma's watching too. Whatever you do, she'll learn from it. Make sure you're teaching her the right lessons." "I'm teaching her that her father will protect her, that betrayal has consequences, and that some people can never be trusted again." Those seem like valuable lessons. As Rob prepared to return to the main house with the evidence that would seal Linda and Derek's fate, he felt the familiar calm that came with having all the pieces of a complex puzzle finally in place. Tomorrow would begin the systematic destruction of everyone who had chosen to betray his family, and Rob found himself looking forward to it with the enthusiasm of a man about to practice his greatest professional skills. Chapter 5: The Trap. Christmas morning arrived with the false serenity of fresh snow covering a battlefield. Rob had spent the night in his home office, using his professional resources to construct a web of consequences that would ensnare everyone who had betrayed his family. By dawn, he had established the foundation for Derek's downfall. Linda had spent the night in the guest bedroom, emerging only to make coffee with shaking hands. Patricia remained planted in the living room, alternating between defiant silence and whispered phone calls to people Rob couldn't identify. Both women seemed to understand that their fate now rested entirely in Rob's hands. Emma remained with Frank, building puzzles and helping prepare Christmas breakfast as if the previous day's revelations had been a nightmare they'd all awakened from. Her resilience impressed Rob, but her occasional thoughtful glances toward the main house suggested she was processing everything with the analytical mind she'd inherited. At 9:45 a.m., Rob positioned himself in his office where he could observe the side entrance through the security cameras he'd installed years ago. Derek's arrival was punctual, another sign of his professional approach to manipulation. Linda let Derek in through the side door, and their embrace lasted longer than necessary for simple comfort. Even now, facing exposure and consequences, they clung to their delusion that their relationship was somehow romantic rather than transactional. Rob waited exactly 10 minutes before making his entrance, timing it to catch Derek in mid-consolation as he held Linda's hands and promised her everything would work out. The tableau was perfect for establishing Derek's continued manipulation even after discovery. "Derek, thank you for coming." Derek startled but recovered quickly, releasing Linda's hands and extending one toward Rob. Hey man, Linda called yesterday pretty upset. Thought I should check on the family. Rob ignored the offered handshake. How thoughtful of you to be concerned about my family's welfare. Something in Rob's tone made Derek step back slightly. Well, you know, we've gotten to know each other pretty well during the renovation. Linda's been going through a lot. Yes, I imagine managing an affair and embezzling money would be stressful. The silence that followed was profound. Derek's face cycled through surprise, denial, and calculation in the span of seconds. Linda made a small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. I'm not sure what you mean, Derek said carefully. Rob pulled out his phone and played a brief audio clip. Derek's voice discussing the best methods for transferring money without triggering bank reporting requirements, followed by Linda's voice asking about offshore account options. Derek's composure cracked. That could be taken out of context. Could it? Rob played another clip. Derek telling Linda she was finally getting what she deserved, and that her husband was too stupid to see what was happening right under his nose. Derek's survival instincts kicked in, and he began moving toward the door. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Sit down. The command was spoken with quiet authority, but something in Rob's stance, the balanced posture of someone prepared for physical confrontation, made Derek comply. Linda, would you excuse us? Patricia's waiting for you in the living room. I believe you have some calls to make. Linda hesitated, torn between protecting Derek and self-preservation. Rob, please. Now. After Linda left, Rob settled into his chair and studied Derek with the analytical gaze he used when examining financial records for inconsistencies. Derek Hoffman, 42 years old, originally from Phoenix, Arizona, where you were convicted of fraud in 2018. You changed your name legally in Nevada before moving east and establishing your current identity. Derek's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Rob opened a folder and laid out photographs. Marcia Stevens in Virginia Beach. You convinced her to empty her children's college funds. Diane Murphy in Charlotte. You disappeared with her divorce settlement. Jennifer Walsh in Richmond. You left her facing felony charges for embezzlement after convincing her to steal from her employer. Each photograph showed Derek with a different woman, in similar poses of intimacy and trust. Should I continue? Because I have documentation on 7 other victims over the past 5 years. Derek leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing through escape options. What do you want? I want you to understand your situation completely. Right now, Linda believes you love her. She thinks you're going to run away together and start a new life with my daughter's college fund. She has no idea that you've already been planning your exit strategy for weeks. Rob produced bank statements showing Derek's recent financial activities, payments to moving companies, searches for properties in states without extradition treaties, and most damning, email communications with other potential victims he was already cultivating. Your mistake, Rob continued, was assuming that because I work with numbers, I couldn't recognize a human predator. But fraud is fraud, whether it involves corporate accounts or family savings. Derek tried a different approach. Look, Linda came to me. She said you were controlling, that she needed help. Derek, Rob's voice carried a warning that made the other man stop talking immediately. I've spent the past 12 hours researching your methods, your victims, and your current situation. I know about your debts in Atlantic City. I know about the men who've been looking for you. I know about the 3 other women you're currently targeting. Derek's face had gone gray. The men from Atlantic City represented a debt that had gone far beyond money. It now involved personal survival. Here's what's going to happen, Rob said, leaning forward slightly. You're going to return every penny you've taken from Linda. You're going to sign a confession detailing your fraud scheme. And you're going to disappear from our lives permanently. And if I refuse? Rob smiled with genuine amusement. Then I make a few phone calls. First, to Susan Hayes, warning her about your current con. Second, to the other 2 women you're targeting. Third, to your creditors in Atlantic City, providing them with your current address and plans to skip town. Derek's composure finally shattered completely. You can't do that. Those men, you don't understand what they're capable of. I understand perfectly, which is why you have exactly one option for survival. Complete cooperation with making this right. The money's already moved. I can't just. Derek, you have $47,000 in 3 different accounts, plus another $32,000 you've extracted from your other current victims. I have account numbers, routing information, and access codes. You can cooperate willingly, or I can take the money and let your creditors know you tried to cheat them as well. The reality of his situation finally penetrated Derek's panic. Rob hadn't just discovered the affair. He'd systematically dismantled Derek's entire operation with the same methodical precision he used in his professional work. What guarantee do I have that you won't turn me in any way? None whatsoever, Rob replied cheerfully. Your survival depends entirely on how completely you cooperate and how quickly you remove yourself from our lives. Every day you remain in this area increases the chance that I'll decide you represent a continued threat to my family. Derek stared at Rob, finally understanding he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than the passive victim he'd expected. What about Linda? Linda's consequences are separate from yours. Your only concern should be fulfilling your part of our agreement and disappearing before I change my mind about letting you leave with your life. You're threatening me? Rob's smile was cold and completely without humor. Derek, I'm promising you. Sign the confession, return the money, and leave. Or face the consequences of continuing to threaten my daughter's future. The choice is entirely yours. As Derek reached for the pen Rob offered, his hands shaking with the recognition of his complete defeat, Rob felt the satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered much more dangerous prey than he'd initially appeared to be. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. While Derek signed his confession in Rob's office, Linda and Patricia huddled in the living room, their whispered conversation occasionally punctuated by Patricia's indignant exclamations and Linda's muffled sobs. Through the security monitors, Rob watched their body language deteriorate from defiance to desperation as they began to grasp the completeness of their exposure. Emma appeared in Rob's office doorway just as Derek finished signing the documents that would transfer all stolen funds back to the family accounts. Dad, Grandpa Frank wants to know if our Christmas plans are still happening. Rob glanced at Derek, who had gone pale at the sight of the 9-year-old whose future he'd been willing to steal. Yes, sweetheart. Our plans are definitely still happening. Mr. Wilson was just leaving. Derek started to speak, perhaps to apologize or explain himself to Emma, but Rob's expression stopped him cold. Some boundaries could never be crossed, and involving Emma and Derek's attempts at redemption was one of them. I need to get my tools from the bathroom, Derek said quietly. You have 15 minutes. Emma will show you out when you're finished. As Derek gathered his equipment, Rob called Frank's secure line. It's done. Derek's cooperating fully and will be gone within the hour. And Linda? Phase 2 begins this afternoon. After Derek's hasty departure, Rob found Linda and Patricia exactly where he'd left them, though their whispered conference had taken on the frantic quality of people planning an escape from a burning building. Ladies, we need to discuss the immediate future. Patricia stood with renewed defiance. I want to call my lawyer. Of course you do. But first, you should understand exactly what legal exposure you're facing. Rob laid out a folder containing bank records, phone logs, and security footage. Accessory to theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and depending on how we structure the charges, potentially kidnapping if we can prove you were planning to leave the state with Emma. Linda's face went white. We never planned to take Emma. Really? Because Derek's confession includes detailed discussions about relocating to a non-extradition country, and your internet searches show you've been researching international schools and passport requirements for minors. Patricia's lawyer bravado crumbled. That was we were exploring options. You were planning to steal my daughter along with her college fund. Rob's voice remained calm, but something in his eyes made both women step back. The only reason you're not already in custody is because Emma doesn't need the trauma of watching her mother and grandmother arrested on Christmas Day. Linda found her voice. What do you want? I want you to understand that your choices have destroyed your place in this family permanently. There will be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, and no second chances. You can't keep me from Emma. I'm her mother. You're a woman who chose to steal from her daughter's future to fund an affair with a con artist. What kind of mother does that make you? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Linda had no answer because they all knew the truth. She had prioritized her own desires over her child's welfare, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Patricia tried a different approach. Linda made mistakes, but she's still Emma's mother. Emma needs stability, honesty, and protection from people who would sacrifice her future for their own gratification. Rob's gaze fixed on Patricia with laser intensity. She doesn't need a grandmother who helped orchestrate the theft of her college fund. I never touched any money. You provided information about my travel schedule, gave Derek access to my home office, and helped Linda hide her activities. You're an accessory to everything that happened here. Rob pulled out his phone and played another audio recording. Patricia's voice explaining Rob's work schedule to Derek, discussing the best times to access the house, and confirming details about the family's financial accounts. The older woman sank into her chair, finally understanding the completeness of her exposure. Here's what's going to happen, Rob continued. Linda, you have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave this house. You'll be allowed supervised visitation with Emma, contingent on your complete cooperation with the divorce proceedings and your agreement to seek professional help for whatever underlying issues led you to make these choices. And if I refuse, then I file charges for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Derek's confession implicates you as a knowing participant in a scheme to defraud your own family. You'll face criminal prosecution rather than just divorce proceedings. Linda's shoulders sagged with defeat. What about Emma? How do I explain? You don't explain anything to Emma. I'll handle telling our daughter why her mother chose an affair and theft over her family. Your only responsibility now is to face the consequences of your choices. Patricia stood up with renewed indignation. You can't do this. Emma needs her mother. Patricia, you seem to misunderstand your situation. You have no legal relationship to Emma. You have no rights regarding my daughter. And you have considerable legal exposure for your role in this conspiracy. What are you saying? I'm saying you have the same 24 hours Linda has to remove yourself from our lives. Permanently. You can't ban me from seeing my granddaughter. I can and I will. You chose to participate in stealing from Emma's future. That choice has consequences. The finality in Rob's voice seemed to penetrate even Patricia's denial. And if we fight you in court? Rob's smile was cold. Then you'll discover exactly how thorough my documentation has been and exactly how much evidence I've compiled regarding your conspiracy to defraud a minor. I'm very good at my job, Patricia. I know how to build cases that are impossible to defend against. As the reality of their situation finally sank in, both women seemed to age before Rob's eyes. Linda's sobs became desperate gasps, while Patricia stared at the floor, perhaps finally understanding that her choice to enable Linda's betrayal had cost her access to her granddaughter. You're destroying Emma's family, Linda whispered. No, Rob replied with quiet certainty. You destroyed Emma's family when you chose Derek over your daughter. I'm protecting what's left of it. Emma appeared in the doorway, having finished her Christmas morning activities with Frank. She looked at her mother and great-grandmother with the analytical gaze she'd inherited from Rob, taking in their tears and defeated postures. Are you leaving now? She asked Linda directly. The innocence of the question, delivered without anger or emotion, hit Linda like a physical blow. Her own daughter had already accepted her departure as inevitable. Emma, sweetheart, Mommy made some mistakes. I know, Emma said simply. Grandpa Frank explained that sometimes people choose things that hurt their families. He said you chose Derek instead of us. That's not. I never meant. But Emma had already turned away, her attention shifting to Rob. Dad, Grandpa Frank says we can still have Christmas dinner if you want. He made a turkey and everything. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. Go tell Grandpa Frank we'll be there in a few minutes. As Emma left, Rob turned back to Linda and Patricia, his expression reflecting the finality of a door closing forever. 24 hours. After that, any attempt to contact Emma or interfere with our lives will result in immediate legal action. This is the only mercy you'll receive from me. Chapter 7. The Price of Betrayal. The divorce proceedings unfolded with the methodical precision Rob brought to all his professional work. Linda's attorney, a well-meaning family law practitioner named Michael Harrison, quickly discovered he was outmatched against someone who treated legal combat with the same analytical intensity he applied to forensic accounting. 3 weeks after Christmas, Harrison sat across from Rob in a downtown conference room, surrounded by bankers' boxes containing evidence that painted an incontrovertible picture of Linda's theft and conspiracy. Derek's signed confession had been notarized and corroborated by bank records, audio recordings, and testimony from his previous victims whom Frank had located and convinced to cooperate. Mr. Sullivan, My client is willing to accept a no-fault divorce with joint custody arrangements. No. The single word carried such finality that Harrison paused in his presentation. I'm sorry. There will be no joint custody. Linda forfeited her parental rights when she chose to steal from her daughter's future to fund an affair. Mr. Sullivan, regardless of marital misconduct, Linda is still Emma's mother. Courts are generally reluctant to. Rob slid a thick folder across the table. Your client conspired with a known con artist to embezzle $47,000 from accounts designated for her daughter's education and medical care. She planned to flee the country with this money and potentially take Emma with her to a location where I would have no legal recourse for recovery. Harrison opened the folder and his face went pale as he reviewed Derek's confession, the audio recordings, and the evidence of Linda's internet searches regarding international relocation and passport requirements for minors. These are serious allegations, but they're not allegations. They're documented facts supported by physical evidence, recorded conversations, and witness testimony. Rob leaned forward slightly. Your client had every intention of destroying Emma's future to fund her new life with a career criminal. Linda maintains that she never intended to permanently relocate Emma. Linda maintains many things that are contradicted by evidence. She also maintained she was attending book club meetings while she was actually meeting Derek in hotel rooms charged to credit cards she'd hidden from me. Harrison studied the evidence for several more minutes, his expression growing increasingly grim. What are you proposing? Supervised visitation only, contingent on Linda's completion of a psychological evaluation and ongoing therapy. No overnight visits. No unsupervised contact. Full financial disclosure of any assets Linda has hidden. And a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting Emma without court approval. Those are extremely harsh terms. They're appropriate consequences for a woman who chose to betray her family and steal from her child. Harrison tried a different approach. Mr. Sullivan, I understand you're angry, but Emma needs her mother. Emma needs protection from a mother who would sacrifice her future for personal gratification. Emma needs to understand that actions have consequences and that some betrayals can never be forgiven. You're talking about a 9-year-old girl. I'm talking about my daughter, whose welfare is my primary responsibility. And my primary responsibility includes protecting her from people who have proven they'll prioritize their own desires over her needs. The conference room door opened and Linda entered with Patricia beside her, both women looking haggard and desperate. Linda's appearance shocked Harrison. She'd lost weight. Her clothes hung loosely, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of their losses. Rob, please, Linda said before Harrison could stop her. Emma is my daughter too. I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt her. You stole her college fund to pay for hotel rooms where you cheated on her father. How exactly did you expect that wouldn't hurt her? I was going to pay it back. With what money? Derek was planning to disappear with everything you'd stolen. You would have been left with nothing, facing criminal charges, while Emma lost both her financial security and her mother's presence. Patricia stepped forward. She's learned her lesson. She ended things with Derek. Derek ended things with Linda when he realized she had no more money to steal and that I'd discovered his operation. Linda didn't choose to end anything. She was abandoned by a con artist who'd gotten what he wanted. Harrison tried to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps we could discuss a graduated custody arrangement. No. Rob's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. I've made my position clear. Linda will accept the terms I've outlined, or she'll face criminal prosecution for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. You can't do this, Patricia said. Emma needs her mother and grandmother. Emma needed a mother who wouldn't steal from her and a grandmother who wouldn't help orchestrate that theft. You both failed to meet that basic requirement. Linda collapsed into a chair, the fight finally going out of her. What do you want from me? I want you to sign the custody agreement accepting supervised visitation only. I want you to submit to a psychological evaluation to determine whether you're capable of making decisions in Emma's best interest. I want complete financial disclosure of any assets you've hidden. And I want you to accept that your choices have permanently altered your relationship with your daughter. And if I do all that, then you'll be allowed limited, supervised contact with Emma, contingent on your continued compliance and Emma's own wishes as she gets older. Linda looked to Harrison for guidance, but the attorney's expression made it clear he understood the strength of Rob's position. The evidence was overwhelming, and Linda's legal exposure was significant. She needs time to consider, Harrison began. She's had 3 weeks to consider. Derek signed his confession and left the state the day after Christmas. Linda's had plenty of time to understand her situation. Linda's voice was barely a whisper. What about Emma? What have you told her? I've told her the truth, that her mother chose to betray our family and steal from her future, and that choices have consequences. She's 9 years old. She's old enough to understand honesty. She's also old enough to recognize manipulation and betrayal when she sees it, which is a skill that will serve her well given the examples she's been exposed to. The meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. Linda signed the custody agreement, accepting supervised visitation and psychological evaluation requirements. Patricia was banned from any contact with Emma pending the outcome of a separate hearing regarding her role in the conspiracy. As they prepared to leave, Linda made one final attempt. Rob, I know I made terrible mistakes, but Emma is still my daughter. She needs her mother. Rob looked at Linda with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a threat to his family. Emma needs stability, honesty, and protection from people who would sacrifice her welfare for their own desires. She needs to learn that loyalty and betrayal both have consequences, and she needs to understand that some mistakes can never be forgiven. You're teaching her to be as cold as you are. I'm teaching her to be strong enough to survive in a world where people she should be able to trust will betray her for their own benefit. Given recent events, that seems like a valuable lesson. As Linda and Patricia left the conference room, Harrison gathered his papers with the defeated air of someone who'd just watched his client destroy her own life through choices that defied rational explanation. Mr. Sullivan, for what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake. Emma will grow up wondering why she wasn't enough to save her parents' marriage. Rob's expression never changed. Emma will grow up knowing that her father protected her from people who would sacrifice her future for their own gratification. She'll understand that actions have consequences and that betrayal is unforgivable. Those seem like valuable lessons for a young woman to learn. Chapter 8. The Final Judgment. 6 months after the Christmas revelation, Rob's methodical reconstruction of his family's life had reached its final phase. The divorce had been finalized with terms that reflected Linda's complete capitulation. Emma had adapted to her new reality with the resilience of youth tempered by hard-won wisdom, and Derek had disappeared entirely, though not quite in the manner he'd originally planned. Emma, now 10 years old, had grown closer to Rob and Frank, the three of them forming a tight unit that functioned with military precision and genuine affection. She'd accepted the truth about her mother's choices with a maturity that sometimes startled Rob, but she'd also retained her childhood wonder about the world beyond their immediate family crisis. Linda's supervised visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to occasional, partly due to the court-mandated psychological evaluation that had revealed concerning patterns of narcissistic behavior, and partly due to Emma's own growing reluctance to spend time with someone who'd betrayed their family so completely. Patricia had disappeared from their lives entirely after a restraining order formalized what Rob's initial warning had made clear: she was no longer welcome in Emma's life. The first sign that Rob's patience with half measures had reached its limit came on a warm Saturday in June, when Linda arrived for her scheduled visitation 40 minutes late, clearly having been drinking, and began crying to Emma about how Daddy was being mean and how they used to be such a happy family. Emma listened politely for 10 minutes before standing and walking to where Rob waited on the back porch. Dad, I don't want to visit with Mom anymore. She keeps saying things that aren't true, and it makes me uncomfortable. Rob knelt to Emma's eye level. Are you sure? She is your mother, and if you want to maintain a relationship, I'm sure. She made choices that hurt our family, and now she wants me to pretend it didn't happen. That doesn't seem healthy. The analytical clarity in Emma's voice reminded Rob powerfully of himself at that age, already learning to prioritize truth over comfort, substance over sentiment. If that's your decision, I'll support it completely. Thank you. When Rob informed Linda that Emma had chosen to discontinue visitation, her response revealed the depth of her disconnect from reality. You've turned her against me. You've poisoned my own daughter's mind. I've protected my daughter from someone who proved she'd sacrifice Emma's welfare for personal gratification. Emma made her own decision based on her own observations of your behavior. She's 10 years old. She doesn't understand. She understands that you chose Derek and theft over your family. She understands that actions have consequences. And she understands that some betrayals can't be forgiven. Linda's escalating threats about going back to court and fighting for her rights ended when Rob quietly mentioned that Derek's current situation might interest her. What about Derek? Derek discovered that his creditors in Atlantic City don't accept bankruptcy as a solution to gambling debts. They also don't appreciate being lied to about repayment schedules. Linda's face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying Derek's new location was passed along to some people who were very interested in having a conversation with him about money he owed them. I believe that conversation occurred approximately 3 weeks ago. You didn't. I simply made a phone call to someone who'd been looking for Derek. What happened after that conversation was entirely Derek's responsibility. The implications hung in the air between them. Linda finally understood that Rob's mercy had extended only to allowing her to leave with her life, and that mercy had limits. You're a monster. I'm a father who protects his family. The methods I choose depend entirely on the severity of the threat. Linda's last attempt to maintain contact with Emma came in the form of a letter delivered 3 weeks later, filled with manipulative appeals to emotion and attempts to rewrite history. Emma read it carefully, then brought it to Rob. She still doesn't understand, does she? No, sweetheart. Some people never take responsibility for their choices. They always believe they're the victims of circumstances rather than the architects of their own consequences. What should I do with this? Rob handed Emma a lighter. What do you think you should do with it? Emma held the letter over the fireplace and lit it, watching as the pages curled and burned. I think I should protect myself from people who try to manipulate me, even if they're related to me. That's very wise. As the ashes of Linda's letter floated up the chimney, Emma turned to Rob with the serious expression she wore when processing complex emotions. Dad, do you think I'll be okay? Without a mom, I mean. Rob pulled Emma close, choosing his words carefully. I think you'll be better than okay. You've learned to recognize manipulation and betrayal. You've learned that actions have consequences. You've learned that loyalty is earned, not owed. And you've learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you will hurt you the most. Those are hard lessons. They are. But they're lessons that will protect you from the kind of people who would take advantage of your trust or loyalty. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Grandpa Frank says you're the strongest person he knows because you don't let people hurt your family, even when it's hard to stop them. What do you think? I think I want to be strong like you. I want to be someone who protects the people I love, no matter what. As father and daughter sat together watching the fire consume the last physical remnant of Linda's attempts at manipulation, Rob reflected on the lessons he'd inadvertently taught Emma through his methodical destruction of everyone who'd betrayed their family. She'd learned that betrayal has consequences, that loyalty must be earned, and that some people can never be trusted again. But she'd also learned that strength comes from protecting the people you love, regardless of the cost to yourself or your enemies. Most importantly, she learned that her father was someone who would eliminate any threat to her welfare, no matter how closely related that threat might be to their family. It was a harsh education for a 10-year-old, but Rob believed it was preparation for a world where people would try to take advantage of her trust, her loyalty, and her resources. Emma would never be the naive victim that Linda had been to Derek's manipulation. As the last ember died in the fireplace, Rob made a silent promise to his daughter. Anyone who tried to hurt her in the future would discover exactly what her father was capable of when protecting the people he loved. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 2 years had passed since the Christmas revelation that destroyed Rob's marriage and reconstructed his understanding of family loyalty. Emma, now 12, had grown into a young woman who combined her inherited analytical intelligence with a hard-won understanding of human nature that most adults never achieved. The house that had once hosted Linda's book club meetings and Patricia's judgmental observations now functioned with the precise efficiency of a military unit. Rob, Emma, and Frank had developed routines that maximized their time together while respecting each other's individual needs and interests. Emma excelled academically, but more importantly, she developed the kind of emotional intelligence that allowed her to recognize manipulation attempts before they took root. Her teachers occasionally expressed concern about her unusual maturity, but Rob understood they were witnessing the natural development of someone who'd learned early that trust must be earned rather than freely given. The first test of Emma's education came on a crisp October afternoon when Linda appeared at Emma's school, attempting to convince the 12-year-old to leave with her for an impromptu visit. The school secretary, following protocols Rob had established, immediately contacted him while Emma handled the situation with remarkable composure. "I'm not allowed to leave school with you without Dad's permission," Emma told Linda calmly. "I'm your mother. I have rights. You have supervised visitation rights that I chose not to exercise." Dad explained the legal situation to me. Linda's attempt to manipulate Emma through tears and emotional appeals failed completely. Emma listened politely, then asked the secretary to call security when Linda refused to leave the school grounds. When Rob arrived, he found Linda in the principal's office, alternating between indignation about his poisoning of Emma's mind and desperate pleas for understanding about her reformed character. "She's my daughter too," Linda insisted to the principal. "He can't keep me from her forever." "Actually, he can," Emma said from the doorway where she'd been waiting for Rob. "And I can keep me from you. I don't want a relationship with someone who chose to betray our family." The principal, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama, looked to Rob for guidance. "Emma's position is clear," Rob said. "She's made an informed decision about the kind of relationship she wants with her mother, and I support that decision completely." Linda made one final attempt. "Emma, sweetheart, I've changed. I've been in therapy. I've learned from my mistakes. Have you returned the money you stole from my college fund?" Linda's hesitation was answer enough. "Have you apologized to Dad for cheating on him and lying to our family?" Another hesitation. "Have you accepted responsibility for your choices without blaming Dad or making excuses?" Linda's silence stretched until Emma nodded as if Linda had answered aloud. "Then you haven't really changed. You've just learned new ways to try to manipulate people." As Linda left the school grounds under security escort, the principal turned to Rob with barely concealed amazement. "That's quite a young lady you're raising. She's learned to protect herself from people who would take advantage of her trust or affection. It's a valuable skill." The second test came 6 months later when Derek's sister, a woman named Amanda who'd apparently inherited the family's manipulative tendencies, contacted Emma through social media with a carefully crafted story about Derek's tragic death and his final wishes to apologize to the Sullivan family. Emma brought the messages to Rob immediately. "She's trying to make me feel guilty about Derek," Emma observed. "She says he died because people were chasing him and that he really loved Mom and wanted to marry her." Rob examined the messages, noting their sophisticated emotional manipulation techniques. "What do you think?" "I think Derek made choices that hurt our family, and that the consequences of those choices were his responsibility, not ours. I also think this woman is probably lying about most of what she's telling me." "Why do you think that?" "Because if Derek really wanted to apologize, he would have apologized before he left town with our money. And because people who really change their behavior don't need other people to make excuses for them." Rob's pride in Emma's analytical clarity was tempered by sadness that she'd needed to develop such sophisticated defenses at such a young age. But he also recognized that these skills would protect her from predators throughout her life. "How do you want to handle this?" Emma deleted the messages without responding. "I want to protect myself from people who try to manipulate me, even if they're trying to make me feel sorry for someone who hurt our family." The final validation of Rob's approach came on Emma's 13th birthday when Frank presented her with a special gift: enrollment in a self-defense program he'd researched specifically for young women. "Physical strength is important," Frank explained, "but mental strength is even more important. Your father's taught you to recognize manipulation and betrayal. Now you need to learn to defend yourself against people who might try to use physical intimidation." Emma accepted the gift with enthusiasm, understanding intuitively that physical and emotional self-defense were related skills. That evening, as they celebrated Emma's birthday with a small party that included only the 3 family members who'd proven their loyalty, Emma made an observation that crystallized everything Rob had tried to teach her. "Dad, I've been thinking about Mom and what happened with Derek." "What about it?" "I think the most important thing you taught me is that family isn't about genetics or obligation. It's about choice and loyalty and protecting each other." Rob glanced at Frank, who was nodding with approval. "What makes you say that?" "Because Mom was genetically my family, but she chose Derek over us. Patricia was my grandmother, but she chose to help Derek steal from me. Derek pretended to care about Mom, but he was really just using her. Emma paused to gather her thoughts, her expression serious beyond her years. But you chose to protect me even when it meant fighting people who were supposed to be our family. Grandpa Frank chose to help protect me even though he could have stayed out of it. We chose each other, and we keep choosing each other every day. Rob felt a profound sense of completion. Emma understood not just the events that had reshaped their family, but the underlying principles that would guide her future relationships. That's exactly right, sweetheart. So I want you to know that I choose you and Grandpa Frank as my real family. And I choose to be someone who protects the people I love, no matter what. As Emma blew out her birthday candles, Rob reflected on the journey from that Christmas morning when a 9-year-old had handed him a folder that exposed his wife's betrayal. The revelation had destroyed his marriage, eliminated toxic relationships, and forced painful lessons about trust and loyalty. But it had also created something stronger. A family based on choice rather than obligation, loyalty rather than genetics, and mutual protection rather than convenient manipulation. Emma would grow up understanding that betrayal has consequences, that loyalty must be earned, and that family is defined by actions rather than blood relationships. She would never be vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that had nearly destroyed Linda's relationship with her own daughter. Most importantly, she would understand that strength comes from protecting the people you love, regardless of the cost to yourself or your enemies. As Rob watched his daughter laugh with her grandfather over some private joke, he felt satisfied that he'd given her the tools she needed to navigate a world full of people who would try to take advantage of her trust, her loyalty, and her resources. The price of that education had been high: a marriage, extended family relationships, and perhaps some innocence that most children retain longer. But the alternative, raising a daughter vulnerable to the Derek Wilsons of the world, was unacceptable. Emma would never be anyone's victim, and she would never allow anyone to betray her family without facing appropriate consequences. Rob had kept his promise to protect his daughter, and in doing so, he'd created a legacy of strength that would serve Emma throughout her life. The folder Frank had given Emma that Christmas morning had contained evidence of betrayal, but it had also contained the foundation for a family built on loyalty, strength, and mutual protection. In the end, that seemed like a fair trade. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.